Good morning, folks. A little late getting started on the schedule, but we're all good. And as you can see, this is going to be a slightly less formal session this morning. I know this might be a topic that you have some questions about. I think it's a topic that we all have questions about. And it's something where I feel like opening up a discussion is going to be more useful. I have no interest in sitting up here and lecturing you on ethics. It's like, no, this is bad, this is good, right? So let's just kind of find out where we are. And please, if you want to move around, make yourself comfortable. If you feel like you need to get up and move during the session, do so. Anyone wants to come plop down on the floor, that's cool, gonna be a long day. If you feel like you want to sketch, doodle, take notes, we've got another whiteboard and some markers over there and one up here behind me that I'm probably not gonna use. So when I say ethics, what do you think of? First thing that comes to mind?
Good and bad.
Okay, good and bad. Rules. Oh, we're going to get along just fine. Oh, wait, did you see my speaker notes?
Yeah.
Anything else?
How to live a good life.
Okay. Boundaries, that's a good one.
Expectations.
Okay.
Personal code.
Okay.
Responsibility.
Responsibility, important.
Integrity.
Thank you.
Respect.
Okay. Can you elaborate on that one a little bit?
Respect.
Not right now, because I haven't had like any coffee or anything.
Okay, seriously, like if you need to go get a cup and come back, please.
He actually kind of helped remind me of self-respect, really.
Okay. Yeah, I think there's something there. Respect for yourself, respect for others.
Tough decisions.
Okay. Anything else coming up?
Morals.
Okay.
Consequences.
Everything. Culture? Yep. Okay. These are all fantastic, and honestly, I think most of y'all have had more coffee than I have. So, usually, if you look at the dictionary, ethics is defined as a code or a system of actions that apply morality. So as engineering is applied science, ethics could be considered as applied morality. Personally, I'm not super interested in digging in to morals. You know, those tend to be deeply personal, often founded on your belief system. You know, that is up to you. Do I think it's important to have a personal code of ethics based on whatever your morals may be? Yes. Do I think it is important to consider the roles that our culture, our societal expectations play in that? Yes. Part of any shared collective ethics we may have really has to depend on what is appropriate and expected from the people around us. On the other hand, you can also have, well, everybody else is doing it. That doesn't always make it right, right? While we're there, let's talk about a few more things that I'm not really planning on us getting into this morning. Ethics is an enormous field of scholarship. You know, we have a huge legacy of global scholarship on the topic. You know, there are people who live their entire professional lives in the field. I am not particularly an academic. Their work is critical and we need it. But for me, this is more about how we apply it, what we do with it, what that looks like in our day-to-day lives as developers, designers, engineers, business people, leaders. I'm also not particularly wanting to dive into, for example, ethics of AI. There is an AI session later on, and you should absolutely go to it. Frankly, that deserves its own conference. It's a huge topic. I think we all know it's coming. And that deserves so much more time than the next 40 minutes. Likewise, I'm not particularly meaning to dive into bioethics, these kind of deep topical discussions where we should rightfully have a panel up here with that expertise and that experience. Where I am coming from is 15 years running a software company. I've spent time on pretty much all sides of this business, as a freelancer in kind of that most vulnerable of positions, as a low-level employee, as a founder, as a CTO, running teams, as a product designer, as an architect. And what I have found is that almost every day, some kind of decision pertaining to ethics crosses my desk. So, who in the room would say that you have a position of leadership at your company? Okay, little over half. Is there anyone in the room who feels disempowered at your company? A few? Okay, thank you. Is there anyone who feels like you spend a lot of time managing up on design, leadership, engineering decisions? Yeah, that's a pretty common experience unless you are the person being managed up. And how many people feel like you're a decision maker on things like whether to take on a project, whether to build a feature, kind of that high level scope decision? Okay, pretty good number, awesome. How many people feel like you are a decision maker in how something gets implemented? That's what I wanted to see, because if you're writing code, if you're touching code, if you're making any kind of design choices, if you're running a team, you're in that place. So, this part shouldn't be news to any of you. Being in tech gives us a ridiculous amount of power. We have leverage that extends our reach far beyond most people's. Merely having access to those tools, access to the knowledge, access to come up with the next great innovation. access to a little design choice on a tool that millions of people are going to use, that's going to impact those people every day. We're all interconnected, but the reality is that we have an outsized voice and outsized power. That doesn't mean we're any better. It doesn't mean we're smarter. It sure as hell doesn't mean we're more responsible. Nonetheless, we have this power. So, what are we going to do with it? So there's an obvious discussion point that, keeps coming up time and time again. And frankly, it's at the entire crux of the quarrel around the word engineer. How many people have had that discussion? Not too many. Okay. Claire?
Is this about the am I technical, or is this about what's engineering? I'm not sure.
Okay, going there. Are most people familiar with the professional engineer designation? Okay. So if you are a classical engineer, mechanical, civic, industrial, structural, in the US, there is a designation, the PE, the Professional Engineer Designation. That means you have taken a certain number of certification exams, you have a certain degree of guaranteed, supposedly, competence. We can dive into exams later. And that you have a professional code of ethics that is governed by a national society. And for many of us, so Claire, is that a question? Please.
My husband's a professional engineer, and he had to go through an apprenticeship program as well.
Also.
You couldn't just start working, you had to work under another engineer who had already gone through this.
Yes, thank you. And yes, if anyone wants to jump in, please just raise your hand and we'll open this up. So some of the points of the Professional Engineering Code of Ethics, and this is really where it gets down to about the controversy over the term, that a software engineer has none of these requirements, and the professional engineers are perhaps rightfully annoyed by this. So the canons of their code of ethics. In their professional duties, engineers shall hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. Yeah. If you're building bridges, you're building sewers, if you're building anything really, I think we all think this is probably a pretty good idea, right? Shall perform services only in the area of their competence. Someone who builds bridges should not build sewers. Obviously, that's where, as software engineers, we could have a field day with that one, because I learn on the fly, y'all. Shall issue public statements only in an objective and truthful manner. You shouldn't go knowingly lie to the press. That's a good one. Act for each employer or client as faithful agents. That you should not knowingly deceive your employer or your client. Avoid deceptive acts. It's kind of in the same vein. Conduct themselves honorably, responsibly, ethically, and lawfully. that one gets a little vague, and they have pages and pages of explication on that one. But just as that kind of background, am I suggesting we need a tech code of ethics? I don't know. I'm not sure we're there yet. Any thoughts?
Steve McConnell's book that was written in the early 90s suggests that we needed
Yes.
this sort of rigor around it.
He was one of the first major proponents.
Where there are conversations about the internet being considered a basic utility, like water and electricity, they have fixed ethics. Given how many people the internet affects, it makes sense that we should.
Absolutely. And so do we make tech a utility? In the back?
I think part of it, since tech is so pervasive, the first one you mentioned about the health and safety of the public, I think that we do need a code of ethics and responsibility. If I write a bug that causes something that causes people to, if I'm building a bridge and I screw it up, I'm responsible for that. I could lose my certification. If I write a bug that allows a bank to get hacked, maybe I don't deserve to be allowed to write that kind of critical code anymore. Yeah, maybe I can build a playhouse, I can build a small little website, but maybe I shouldn't be allowed to do fintech stuff because I didn't have the ability to do that without causing this massive bug. And as we have all these things that are critical, lives depend on them. There are machines that do calculations to give you medicine, your life depends on them. We need a way to find people that are qualified to hold our lives in their hands, like we do when we walk over a bridge or sit in a building someone built.
So that's a really interesting point, and I'd like to offer back. There's a point about individual and collective responsibility that I think could be unpacked out of that. Let's try this one. Who here is writing code that could kill someone? Okay, feeling a little lonely now.
I have in the past, but not currently. Yeah.
Okay, or has ever, or that through neglect or through failure. Okay. That looks a little more reasonable. I was about to be really worried, y'all. Where we're going to have bugs. We are going to make mistakes. But the process, the team, the layers of surety. I want to offer that back as, yes, individual competence is important. And also, when you're pushing the boundaries, mistakes are going to happen. So how do we make that assurance? My company deals in cannot fail systems a great deal of the time. And the layers and layers and layers, sometimes I say it's like we have two companies. We have the move fast and break stuff, and then we have this cannot fail, this will not fail.
Kind of piggybacking off that, I do completely agree that there needs to be some sort of almost universal kind of truth when it comes down to the type of products and software that we release, right? But I think in that same breath, we can't dehumanize, right? Because we're all human and we're prone to error, we're going to make mistakes or whatever. But I think what we have to always realize and keep in mind is the human intent behind technology. It's not the technology, because when we're creating solutions, we're putting solutions out to solve the problem, right? And I think the issue, even with hacking or whatever, is the human intention behind the technology, what pushes you to want to steal money, break into whatever, right? So I think it's a fine line, right? So, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges in software development, but not just software development, but in general. I think we have to, of course, do whatever the necessary steps to protect the code release and make sure it's stable, hack-proof, or whatever as best as we can. But I think it's the human intent that ultimately causes those failures in technology.
And that's part of why this is such a complicated issue, right? We jump back to you, and then you, and you two are pulling me into two different sections of this.
Right, I was going to say, I don't think we're there yet, because the big difference between software engineering and physical engineering is the materials that we're using are completely in flux at all times. With there's some unifying code with mechanical engineering, right? There's government, there's some kind of governing body. Back in the 90s, 2000s, Adobe was one of these certifying companies. You get certified as an Adobe developer with their program, and every year and a half you have to get recertified because their program is completely different. And you're relying on somebody else's code to then get certified on that. So until somebody can figure out what this giant global, and the other problem I was going to say, of course, even in the industry, front end has its own set of values that you can certify against that are often antithetical to that of the server infrastructure back end. So it's a lot in flux. It's a good conversation.
Yeah, and that's another reason why I would say that is the massively complicated execution problem, because we're not going to go backwards. We're not going to suddenly be evolving less rapidly. I mean, I've got projects active in 7, 8 back-end languages right now. So figuring out that piece of it is going to be critical. Okay, can we go one more comment, and then I think we might be able to bring you back in after my next section.
I was going to say, to your point, I think that intent a lot of the time is why this conversation is very important as well. When you make kind of a physical representation, if you think of a civil engineer building a bridge, the intent is to get from one side to the other. But if you don't put in the safety aspects, you could meet the requirements, but what happens if a car crashes and it goes over the edge? Or what happens if there's too many cars on the bridge and it causes it to collapse? And I think that a lot of the time in software, we make that happen even though our intent might be solved by getting from one side to the other. We don't design for what our users may do and can cause harm to our users through backdoors or through security issues. And I think that's one of the things with the code of ethics, question in software is that users don't have a lot of knowledge all the time on how they may harm themselves in the software that they're using. And so do we need to design better to users who don't have that knowledge?
Yes, and perhaps that is one of the answers, not that we necessarily have a fixed code, but that it's important that we have this conversation and that we have it on an ongoing basis because it is evolving so rapidly. So, design, leadership, and then I want to do a little bit of gaming out. We just started trickling into this, and forgive my presumption, but I think this might have been where you were going. Leadership and companies. So we started out with ethics being about an applied morality. Companies are inherently amoral. When you start a company, the minute you go beyond sole proprietorship, the minute there is anyone involved other than yourself, you've created something bigger than yourself. You've created an entity which, in a very real way, has its own life. It is not human. It does not have societal or cultural expectation. A company is an entity that does not necessarily value human rights. So that's where every single person has to play a role. Because when people opt out of responsibility, if you remove yourself from that process of considering the outcome of your actions, the company's only drive is to survive. Companies survive by making money. If they make money by harming their users, that is what is going to happen. We've seen this over and over. Who remembers Don't Be Evil? Yeah. So in this position, if you are implementing features, if you are designing them, if you are working on product scope, if you are managing people, if you are creating the product design, if you're building out the architecture, if you're deploying it, you have a role. And here's the part that might feel a little uncomfortable. If that product harms someone, you had a role in it. You had a job. Claire?
We talked a bit about the professional engineering process. My husband is a civil engineer, and we talk a lot about project-based work in software being very similar to project-based work in civil engineering.
Mm-hmm.
And there are analogs for the professional engineering process where you have reviewers within your company, you have reviewers from the government, you have a follow-up actually. So you have the team that does the design in-house, and then there are people who actually build the structures or create the support systems that were designed, and there's a follow-up after that called an as-built. So you go back to look at what was actually created, and that's not necessarily what was designed. And if it wasn't matching in some way that's significant, then you have to mitigate that risk. And that involves a lot of wrangling and interpersonal responsibility and what's the ethical thing to do in the situation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, were we leading in? Yeah, that's why I think we need the code. We need something that says we have to think about ethics. Because as a developer, it's easy to brush off and see someone else will do it. But if we have this code that says we have to, it is our job personally to think about the ethics, to think about the impact of what we're doing, then people will do it.
So I work for a company called Atlassian, and our mission value, our values as a company start with don't fuck the customer. And I use that every day in sparring, in meetings as my weapon. So if we're doing something that's going to make the customer experience worse or can cause harm, I have this mission value that I can use as my shield to say, listen, this is not me. I'm sure you did great work. The company says we can't screw over the customer. So we use that every day.
On the other hand, we have civil engineers who build weapons, so that code of ethics doesn't exactly stop that.
And that is a whole other complicated discussion. Believe me, I've had that discussion a lot of times. I have personally built battlefield communication systems. You know, my logic, they're designed to talk to people rather than shoot at them. It's literally a speaker that can be dropped from a plane into an encampment that automatically translates. You pick it up and you talk to people. It's a fancy walkie-talkie. And there are people who will say that because that's being used on a battlefield, that work is still not amoral, but unmoral. So yeah, that can be a really complicated question. We've heard 3 different approaches right there to ways that we can guide companies, establishing those values through regulatory process, through individual responsibility. Everything is about layers, everything is about process. I think my initial suggestion would be use them all. You know, backups on backups on backups. What do? We make stuff not fail. And yes, I'm actually kind of a fan of Atlassian's code. That one is, if you are a designer, particularly if you're a UX folk, that really ought to be way, way up there on your personal values sheet, perhaps. Okay.
With that, if trends are pointing towards the user using your product a certain way, let's say in a cancerous way, is that necessarily screwing the consumer if that's what they want?
So the product that I work on, Bitbucket, does have malware on it all the time.
Okay.
So there's still, if you look at the terms and conditions, they might even be within the terms and conditions, but we have to take responsibility because it could be causing harm to other customers and other people. So there's all kinds of gray lines like that everywhere. So, but it's case by case. But as an individual, my responsibility is if they're not doing what I think is right, then I have to find another job. And I worked for defense corporations where I was not comfortable with what I was doing. Beat the street, so.
And I think we had one more question over here, and then I want to jump back into this area and that area.
Less a question, more a comment. All the time in these conversations, you find people throwing out how complicated things are, creating sort of apprehension around the conversation rather than just being like, we need to do something now. And the thing is, like, you're always going to have edge cases in existing professional engineering. You're going to have edge cases. You're going to have people who skirt what we common as society, certain groups have decided are common ethical codes, but the fact is, like, you're never going to solve everything. And so worrying about every single case versus just saying, like, hey, what is the norm? What are we establishing as the norm? What is the default? And people look to see examples of people who have been doing this for a long time and people who aspire to become. Right now, the model in software engineering is ship a thing, see what it becomes on its own, don't ever even think about consequences, right? And that kind of sucks. And that's not what it should be, regardless of the fact that even if you do come up with a better model, some people will still do the crappy thing, right? Like, yeah, but that's not what people are looking like. You look at any of the multinational software companies, and like the people who got started on it, they never thought about consequences, and that's who people want to become right now.
Yes, thank you. That's really cutting to the root of a lot of it, and kind of where I was hoping to wind up today. Jumping back just a little bit to these questions of design. I know I keep looking down. It's where on this offset time now, so I'm trying to keep us in the discussion. The question of who you're responsible to. Yeah, if let's say you're building malware, your users want to create harm. Well, okay, that might be a little too far out there because we've already departed ethics completely at that point.
Let's change it to like social media and the targeting system that we currently use to get people to hit that button one more time.
Excellent. So if I say gray or dark pattern, does that resonate? I'm seeing some nods, I'm seeing some, okay. In design, a dark pattern is something that is designed to manipulate your users to harm. The job of design is to cause your users to do something. The job of good design is to remove cognitive load from your users. It's not to be beautiful. I mean, great design often is beautiful. It is to remove cognitive load, to make it easier or more straightforward for your users to perform an action. So an example of a dark pattern, because every one of our tools has a dark side. Let's take one of the really bad ones. Advertising pop up, and you go to click on the X, and the X is part of the target area for the pop-up. That's a dark pattern, folks. Quickest explanation ever. A gray pattern is something that's in this area that feels shady. It's like a code smell. And social media is a great example. Actually, let's pick on Netflix a little. How many of y'all are in the room? Oh, wait, we have none of the Netflix folks. Oh. Okay, they're hiding in the corner. Hi, I'm picking on y'all. Love you. Think about you reach the end of the show and then you're watching another episode without even... You didn't make that choice. They made it for you. In a very real way, you were just flat out manipulated into watching another episode by default, such that you must take an action to quit watching.
I would say that's not quite the case, because TV has been around since the 1950s, and it already does that for us. It automatically goes into the next show. Sometimes it's the next episode. I think we have to consciously turn the channels.
Sure, but it's not guaranteed to be the next episode unless you've tuned into a marathon. You don't have the algorithm behind it calculating, this is the next thing you want to watch. And in terms of predictive psychology, that is frighteningly accurate. It's excellent design and engineering. And it is very finely tuned with massive amounts of data to produce precisely that mildly addictive action. Now, do I think that's a gray pattern? Not necessarily. It encourages addictive behavior. It can, it can encourage you to sit there and binge a show for 4 hours instead of whatever else you should be doing then to take care of yourself, do your work, get up and do the laundry, whatever. It is also, to your point, what the user wants. It wouldn't work if there weren't that natural inclination. So it might be encouraging the user's worst impulses in some case, but it is also what the user wants. So perhaps I would say that's a very light gray pattern. Comment?
Yeah, comment on the Netflix versus TV. I think the significant difference there is, like, on TV, there's commercials. You get them go to the bathroom in a commercial, you get them to go off the dog and go get food. Netflix, it just keeps going. There's like a never-ending stream where, like you said, you do have to take action to stop what you're watching, whereas TV kind of had that info pause for you with commercials and different ways like that.
Yes, and that's going back to that point about the leverage that we hold, that TV could not be customized and data-driven in that way, that even, a quarter-second change on that follow episode timing is going to affect user behavior drastically. And I don't know how many people that change would need to pass through. I mean, in a small company, a similarly affecting change could be a single person, or maybe that person and their code reviewer, possibly a designer, so say a couple. I'm confident that it's probably a great deal more at Netflix, but it's still only a tiny fraction of the company. We are coming to the end of our time together, and honestly, we could just keep going. At least, okay, I could, I don't know about y'all. What we did not get to today is some problem solving and gaming out situations. I was hoping to be able to talk about some examples of unethical things we've all been asked to do, and talk about how perhaps as a junior developer, as a designer, you can bring that into an ethical alignment without, up and I quit, that's not right, I won't do this. Because, that's not an option for many people, or at least it's not an immediate option. I will say I will be around this afternoon if anyone has been in a situation like that recently that you'd like to discuss or get some thoughts on. I will throw out, how many spam calls have folks gotten on their cell phones today? We do international communications. We have been asked, I can't tell you how many times, to build robo-dialers that do not scrub the do not call database. It is not only massively unethical, it is illegal. And most of the companies doing it are not based in the US and cannot be pursued. So that's one example of something I personally have had to do, and I'm in a huge position of privilege about that. Having spent 15 years cultivating a company, I can say no. And moreover, I can put the word out to other people in certain areas of the industry. These people are looking for this. Do not take the work. If I find out you've taken them on as a client, the rest of us will take action. So if anyone's in that kind of situation and you'd just like to talk about it, if you need some suggestions, come find me later. I'm going to throw out one more thing, and this goes back to kind of those strategies and ways we can think about it in our last 3 minutes here. The way that I have come to understand a working process over the last 2 or 3 years, here we go, is equity. If diversity means people are in the room, this is a pretty diverse room. Inclusion means that people can participate. Thank you, we did finally get our captioning up and running. I have not been looking to see how accurate it is. I'll check the transcript later. Inclusion means that people can participate, can be present. This is that, well, okay, diversity is getting your hands on them. Inclusion means you're going to retain them. I'm over diversity, I'm over inclusion. Equity or nothing. If you have people in the room and they do not have an equal role, voice, presence in the process, what's the point? There are a lot of implications to that, and that's actually where I'm focusing a lot of my engineering and design time lately. But that is a whole other talk about Audimance and user-centered design and equity. But when we have that equity, if you can build a team of people who look different, sound different, come from different backgrounds, and those people have a place, if you are listening to everyone, if as a leader you are creating an environment where everyone's voice is actually heard, everyone feels some degree of ownership in the process, Again, there's a million ways to create that. You can do it purely through soft power. You can do it through hard skin in the game. You know, everyone who comes in gets a certain number of shares or whatever. But I'm truly coming to believe that that is a critical role in how we create that individual responsibility, how we bring that recognition of human values, of doing good, or at least not doing harm to our companies that are otherwise inherently amoral. Company don't care, so the people have to. And with that, I'd love to talk to anyone later. We do need to wrap up and give somebody else the room. I believe there's a talk about influence in here next, which should be a great, yes, right there, which should be a fantastic lead-in from this. Did I set you up right?
Perfect. I'm hiring you.
You can hire my company. There you go. Would you like the chairs back in the lecture hall?
Yeah, that'd be great if people help with that.
Okay, yes. If you wouldn't mind sort of bringing the chairs back into rows facing the front. He worked really, really hard on his deck, folks.